first reading included this sentence, "You shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." An important event in the story of Israel's exodus and Israel's wandering in the desert, symbolic of their dependence on God, which they constantly had problems with. They complained against him, and yet, in his mercy, he responds by giving them water. This passage is referred to in other parts of the Bible, particularly in the Psalms, and in fact in today's psalm, "Come, let us ring out our joy to the Lord. Hail the rock who saves us." But it is just water that they need because they're in the desert. And on the next day, they will need water again. St. Paul, coming from his background as a rabbi, refers in the first letter to the Corinthians to the rabbinic belief, which is rather charming, I think, that the rock from which Moses struck and the water came, the rock followed them in their wanderings. It was always on tap, as it were. A recurring need for water and a recurring solution. But rather literal, actual water, even though miraculously provided. When we turn to the gospel, we have a different scenario. Water again. One of the points Jesus makes in the story of the Samaritan woman is that anyone who drinks the water that I shall give will never be thirsty again. No need for the rock on tap. So this is very different. The Samaritan woman is intrigued by this. "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Her interpretation, again, is very literal. But if we look at the whole story, we shall see how she grows in knowledge and understanding. At first, she just sees a weary traveller sitting by the well. Fairly abrupt in her first exchange, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" At this stage, she is still thinking literally. "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep." Then after his first speech, in which he says, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who is speaking to you," she pays him more respect. Then there comes another stage, after she realizes that Jesus has seen into her soul and into her personal history. "I perceive that you are a prophet," she says. And after his words about worshipping in spirit and in truth, she starts to speak of the Messiah. Not quite fully believing, she returns to the town and asks her friends, "Can this be the Christ?" And finally, she has brought her whole community with her when they say at the end of the gospel, "We have heard for ourselves and we know that this is indeed the Saviour of the world." In the gospel, we also see the disciples starting at a literal level. What's happened? Has anyone brought him food? On this occasion, as we do otherwise, we don't see their progression to a more sophisticated and spiritual understanding. But perhaps we should be used to this. In general, if there is a wrong end of a stick to be grasped, they will grasp it with enthusiasm. I think that probably we shouldn't feel ourselves that superior to the apostles. We're also quite capable of getting the wrong end of the stick. Sometimes, though, we find ourselves envious of the first disciples who had the grace and opportunity to eat with Jesus, to walk and talk with him. But one of the lessons of this gospel, and indeed of the whole New Testament, is that we must see beyond the literal and the merely historical. As Jesus says, "God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." In other words, Jesus is as close to us now as he was to the Samaritan woman, to the disciples, and anyone else you care to mention, to Pilate, the centurion, and to Mary. This closeness which we have is emphasized in the preface for today, just before the Holy Holy, When he asked the Samaritan woman for water to drink, Christ had already created the gift of faith within her. And so ardently did he thirst for her faith that he kindled in her the fire of divine love. This Sunday is about halfway through Lent, halfway through the preparations of those who are to be baptized, confirmed, or received into the church at Easter. Once again, we look forward to the baptism of those who are preparing and to the renewal of our own baptismal promises at the Easter Vigil and at the Mass on Easter Sunday.